2.
Live, welcome everybody. You are joining our 13th podcast on womenwhowine.edu. Bunch of derelict women in higher education who started drinking together and figured if we did it online, we could continue having these very powerful and strong conversations. If you're sticking with us.
You don't need a website. Why not do it yourself?
What?
With Wix, you can create your own professional website.
You might need a website to be empowered. I don't know. Where is it coming from?
I'm Nori's. Wasn't
I don't know
it?
what that is.
It's easy.
All right. Nori's one of your eardogs.
Text. Use one of our backgrounds.
I
or
don't
upload your
have
own.
anything open, ladies.
All right, well, we'll find out.
It was Nori. Excellent. Good work. So we already decided this wasn't going to be super structured today. And Nori just went away. I think she was killed by the Wix. We could, however, start talking about what we're drinking while we're waiting for her to return.
Jess, why don't you kick it off?
I'm going to kick it off. I tweeted earlier that I am frustrated and angry and done giving any Fs whatsoever. Drinking $5 wine out of the bottle because I can't be bothered to find a wine glass. It's called Gato Negro, so as $5 wine goes, it's pretty okay. And it's premium quality for 150 years since 1865. If that's
Nice.
not great, I don't know what is. So looks like Nori's back.
Hey, I'm back. That was just our YouTube channel. By the way.
Oh, okay, cool. Great.
We're just doing intros and wine.
Perfect. What you got there, Jess? I missed it. You're drinking wine. That's unusual.
I'm drinking $5 wine right out of the bottle, Nori. That's where I'm at today. Black Cat, Sauvignon Blanc. That's 150 years of quality right there. Right there.
Well played.
Thanks. Next up.
Sure, I'll go next. I am drinking one of my favorite wines. It is a, let me try and show it. It's a Turley wine. And notice my Mickey Mouse wine stopper. And it is a 2011 Sonoma Valley Zinfandel. And I was able to find a reviewer critic of it that I kind of liked. It is a good dark red, initially quite closed on the nose, but showed cranberry licorice and an exotic hint of banana. So I've never really had a wine with a hint of banana, but it is really quite tasty. At once sweet and savory with impressive stuffing to its concentrated cranberry and pepper flavors. So I think that being a wine critic, that is a skill in itself.
That's an awful lot going on.
It is a lot going on, but let me say it is a delicious and my favorite.
I don't like my wine
Thank
to
you
be
to my
smarter than
brother
me.
who gave me the bottle.
Awesome. All right. So, Laura, what are you drinking? Did you go already?
No, I will admit that I'm the one who made that commercial come on for you, Nori. So I did it to embarrass you. No, I didn't. I did it to monetize because we're clearly poor because we have people sending us glasses of 3WED wine. So maybe you could see that. Someone sent us a wine glass because we can't afford them and sending us wine bottles. So shout out to Julie Larson who sent me a Black Peak. It's Temporello. It's a 2014 Elevation Cellars. We were there actually it's outside of Seattle. So they have a lot of cellars outside the area because most of the wine is from the east of the state of Washington. So I'm drinking that. I'm cheersing in. I have a Wix on our YouTube channel so we can make some money to afford more wine because we're in education still. So
Nice. I'll go next.
Yeah.
My
What
name is.
What box have you warmed for today?
I know, right? My name's Tanya Justin. I'm from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. And as many of you know, if this is not your first episode, I am back to the Boda box. So, and I have decided for the last few months to stick with the Cabernet Sauvignon. which is from California. So it's got a tapper. Good stuff. I went through all my holiday wines, actually. So we're back to the box, and I'm okay with that.
Hey, that box will stay good for up to 3 weeks after you open it.
She went through all her holiday wines in 2 weeks or
Yeah,
less, just so people know.
Said, my friends.
That's value right there.
Oh, yeah.
That's value.
So I would like to point out that we did get glasses. However, I diverge a little bit. These, I think, are an exceptional gift that were given to all of us. There are quite a few people in our small circle who believe that we give voice and add conversation. And we have like our own 3WEDU glasses. And was a delightful gift, and I want to be very gracious and say thank you. I will drink my giant glass of wine. It's not only beautifully etched with the hashtag 3WEDU, but it actually has enough space for the alcohol that I consume while I talk to you ladies that I love so dearly. So it was a lovely gift, and Whitney, thank you very, very much. That was exceptionally gracious in the giving season. I am drinking in, I don't know, it's kind of interesting that this wine that I've had before suddenly has new meaning today. Alternate truths, true myths, not really sure how the world is going, but a wine that used to taste so lovely now is truly mythical. And yes, that is not lost on me. So today I'll be drinking a true myth, and we are going to be talking about hopes and dreams. And initially we had talked about feminism and really rethinking what it is that brought us this far to be a podcast of 5 women talking about women's issues in higher education. And when we talked about feminism over a month ago, it was really before we knew or had conceived of what was going to happen with the inauguration and the marches that took place over the last weekend across the United States. That for some were about feminism, but for many were about multiple issues. And today we're going to be talking about those issues in our podcast, number 13. So I'll go ahead and admit to be the first one. I didn't actually get to go to any marches because I traveled last week and got terribly sick, which was my first plane trip in recent decades where I just haven't really been that sick on a plane before, and landed, got myself home, and then crawled into bed for about 3 days where I was pretty much unconscious. But the biggest hardship for me was knowing that I had plans on Saturday to get up early, get to the march, and I was able to get my 16-year-old daughter and her best friend up and ready and on a train to be with so many people from my town to just participate nationally in what is still our right to participate with the political process. And the only way people had this last weekend was to go out together in large numbers in cities across not only our country but across the world to express how people felt about where we are politically in this nation. So I'm going to turn things over to you guys to talk about the march itself. I know most of you participated in some way, but your reflections also on where we are as women in higher ed and what the changes in the last couple of weeks are for you.
Can we just quickly go through the panel and ask who marched and where and maybe why? Jess, you want to kick us off with that?
I do. I marched in Washington, D.C. And honestly, by marched, I mean I was right up near the front. And so I stood like this for about 6 hours and then followed a random guy with a bullhorn who told me to go to the mall, the National Mall. He sounded official. So we were like, we are done standing here. We are going to march. And I ended up right in front of the White House. So, I mean, there is so much. I'm going to take a swig out of my bottle. There's so much bullshit going on right now, and it's women's rights, and it's let's just deny science. Scientists can't talk anymore. Forget science. There's the picture that went around Twitter this week of those 7 white men standing around signing an executive order that told me what to do with my vagina. Awesome. That felt really great. You know, the march in Washington was phenomenal. It was the most supportive. Like, you see all these articles about the complete breakdown of social regulation and blah. You know what? Oh my God, it was a mom fest. I saw one guy yell. It was an old white guy. I saw, you know, people sharing snacks. We had a whole bag of snacks. Oh, are you hungry? Here, have a snack. I mean, it was just phenomenally collegial and very, I mean, it was quiet. It was everybody, you know, chanting. But I think my favorite, like the closest I came to getting in a fight was with the guy on the airport shuttle on the way home who was really intent on making my friends and I feel as small as possible. So if you're watching out there, guy, which I bet you're not, I just want to remind you once again how much bigger my friend's truck was than yours and how angry I know you were about it.
So Tanya brought up something important, Jess, and it comes to being, you know, like the idea of feminism may have had a lot of cadence with some people who went, but what personally got you to get on board a plane and go to Baltimore for a march that was called a women's march? What was it for you that you were there for?
Mm-hmm.
If there was something specific.
So that was interesting too, is everybody was there for something different. And I keep seeing criticisms of that. I went for a number of reasons. I went in some ways as catharsis to, you know, to support the cause of women and how we're not second-class citizens or going to be treated that way. I went to support an interesting thing. I went looking for diverse voices and to represent those who aren't being heard or who are being heard as villains. You know, the fight for people of color, the fight for Muslim Americans. And I would have loved to see more of that diversity at the Women's March in Washington. Honestly, it was a little bit white, and some of the things that were being, I guess, highlighted weren't maybe the diverse perspectives I was hoping for.
Can I talk about that a minute?
Yeah, talk about that. That's important.
Yep.
Yeah, so it was really interesting because I obviously took my daughter, who's multiracial. Her dad dropped us off, and actually we marched by his house. So he came on out and waved and saw her marching, very proud. And there was lots of women who were saying the same thing, like, why is this, more or less, just to be blunt, why is this such a white group? Why don't we have more women or people of color? My friend's boyfriend, Marco, shout out to Marco, marched with us. He's Mexican, an immigrant. And so he really felt it was important for him to support us women in marching. But I was talking with Jeff after, and now, you know, Jeff's mother was very old when she had him. Jeff is Penelope's father. And so, you know, she very much was sort of, you know, one step of slavery where it was don't rock the boat. And so I think that there are some cultural things that we need to understand, or at least the women who are making those comments. I mean, I completely understand. And I think there were two big things. One, you know, my ex-husband and Penelope's father was raised to not rock the boat. And so that's a big thing. I think the second thing, you know, Blacks are taught not to congregate or the police are going to come. And one of my stepdaughter's friends was posting on Facebook, you know, an article about that, like why when Black Lives Matters protests, it's predominantly Black or African-American, whatever terminology you're comfortable with, marching, that there's, you know, riot cops out, there's cops in those like really intimidating cars, I forget what they're called, And we didn't see any of that. Now I get it. It was a bunch of women, including a lot of old women, majority white, wearing, I don't know if it was uteruses or pussies on their head. I can't, I wasn't in the circle on that one.
Pussy Riot hat. It's the Pussy Riot hat from Russia, the band, Pussy Riot.
There was, some were saying uteruses, so there was, I heard differing things, yeah. But yeah, that's cool. So it was just really interesting that there are some cultural things that have more or less socialized Blacks to not come together and protest, because then it's, quickly turns into rioting and police get involved and those sorts of things. So, and they're just socialized not to necessarily speak out in those sorts of ways. Even if you think of, and I'm not an expert here, but if you think of slavery, and we look at the stages of the abolition movement and slavery, there were very undercover, implicit ways. Now, I have studied, Afrocentrism. I have studied, different classes on African reality or African American reality and different things like that. Still don't consider myself an expert, but there's lots of information out there, reading different things about, the ways historically that Blacks have been socialized that would lead them to not show up. And then also the ways that they have protested, through slavery, through the abolition movement and so forth. So just something to think about.
There were a lot of really powerful signs, but the ones that changed my perspective and are leading me to action most effectively. One, I don't know what street we were on. I was completely lost the whole time and there were a million people. But I looked over to my right and there was an entire wall of Black women that had a banner that said, "Enjoy your march. You've built this on the backs of our people." Yes,
Wow.
we have. And I
That's interesting.
acknowledge that. And I'm like, okay, help me figure that out. And the other one, the one that's really going to spur me to action, was a sign that said, I hope we'll see all you nice white ladies at our next rally, hashtag
Yeah.
Black Lives Matter.
Well, that one got
Absolutely.
national attention.
Mm-hmm. And so it was, yes. I think that's why some of those voices were absent. And even in the crowd, I mean, I am a privileged white woman. I was able to go with my friends and have mimosas and, things like that. And I acknowledge that. And so when I just tweeted, why did I go? The first reason, honestly, was catharsis. The second reason was to hear. I need to hear, if I'm going to take action in the next 100 days, the next 4 years of my 4 years of service initiative. If you go to 4yos.com, mine is opening difficult spaces for women. So for the next 4 years, I'm going to work on that. And in order
I just wanted to
do it,
quickly,
I have to hear. I have to hear. So number 2 was hear, and number 3 was to be heard. Tanya?
Yeah. I was just going to say we had sort of a different experience. I mean, we did have we did have women, non-white, women of color, again, whatever your terminology that you prefer, predominantly African-American and Latino women marching with us. Not a huge amount of them, but we did. And when I say predominantly, I mean, those were the different races that were represented. But we actually marched down, actually not too far from my house, a pretty traditionally non-white neighborhood, or at least for the last few decades. And we had lots of women and men, minority, non-whites, coming to the doors and standing out and cheering. Some of them jumped in and marched with us. A lot of people just didn't know about it. So I think that was really empowering for them to be supporting what we were doing.
And I'll just jump in. So I marched here in Ithaca, and listening to all of you, I think logistically, I really wanted to go to one of the bigger cities, but I was lucky enough to have been a few days before in London for the week, and so I knew that logistically I just wasn't going to be able to pack up and go away, and so I participated in the march in Ithaca. And the thing that I really appreciated about it was participating in my community. And so, I was surrounded by, I just ran into, of course, all sorts of people I knew. And the people that were speaking were all local people. So they were, you know, people in the community read poetry and sang songs. And so on the one hand, I felt a little bit like I was, you know, missing out because I wasn't in DC or Boston or, you know, one of the big cities, which afterwards, when I saw those, I felt a little bit like I had missed out. But at the same time, the march I was at was a much more intimate experience. And Ithaca being, I guess, diverse, there was a lot of diversity in the march. Like I would not, you know, there was a lot of diversity both in the people that were there. And I use the word diversity, not just race, but there were, you know, infants and small children and grandparents and people in wheelchairs and, you know, all sorts of demographics. And I think that was one of the great things, like Jess said. I mean, I think everybody was there for a different reason. You know, everyone had their own personal reason for wanting to be there. But there were a number of families there. I think it was just really great to see families and people together, and the you know, and the support that it offered. And one of the questions, which I think, you know, we'll talk about a little bit more, but one of the questions that kept getting posed was, you know, what are you marching for? And not meaning for, like, are you marching for feminism or healthcare or whatever the case may be, but action-wise, you know, like what are the goals for the march? What do people hope the outcome will be, and what will be the next steps? And I think that's kind of the really important thing for us to discuss and think about. And I love, you know, what actions are we going to take? It's really amazing across the globe what happened, but, you know, what's next?
Yeah, I think that actually matters. And I'm not sure if I just wasn't paying attention. I always knew the march was coming up, but after the march, I felt, and I literally watched it from Twitter and Facebook on my phone, laying on a couch. But these are important. I think since you've all now been there, you got a sense that I got through social media. It wasn't what people expected, and yet it left everybody with a feeling of, what do I do next? Laura, do you have anything you want to add as well?
Well, I talked about it in a blog post, but I didn't attend, and it was for a couple of reasons. I actually, in talking to some of my peers locally, a couple of them, my friend Tamara went, and she had the same expression as a Black woman, was like, you know, it's going to be predominantly white women, but there's people in our community that showed up for Black Lives Matter, and we've had a few protests and losses of police in our area due to a gathering that went wrong by someone who was just taking advantage of the large crowd situation. We talked a bit about, like, what does it matter to do that versus doing something else, like writing to a governor to make sure they don't hire certain secretaries of education and whatnot in cabinet. And I also thought about actions in different ways. So I've kind of looked to do some of that because I've done it before. I also, as a non-citizen of this country, I've done that before, and I've also been blocked on visa and immigration, and I've held at borders and customs, and I'm afraid of what's going to happen in this new almost police state we're in, that gets trolled on different spots and Twitter, where Jess and I are being trolled right now, to just what that goes on record when one of us or any of us apply for citizenship or have a visa change or coming into our country. Or I have a lot of undocumented students, the same conversations we've been having locally in Dallas. I know that there was about 7,000 to 8,000. So a couple of my friends, we met up for dinner that evening, and I think it was a pretty varied crowd. I don't know about diverse, but there was people of different generations, different walks of life. I know that. But it was really poor. Whatever the message was, there's really not a really good speaker at there. So I feel like it's been good to see support around the nation, but beyond that day, I think it's the actions afterwards. And my friend Heather Shea Gasser was there with the bus from Lansing, Jess, and she talked about, like, you know what, if you're really upset with what I'm saying online, in person, what I'm doing, why don't we pick up a phone call instead of having these flame attacks back and forth on Facebook, on Twitter? And she's really encouraged some dialogues. And I know that she is open to that and wants to have conversations and recognizes that people aren't going to like it, but she's going to be? And I kind of been thinking about, well, how am I going to be in some of these spaces?
The one thing I feel like is that critics of the march were taking away from the symbolism of the march. In that, what are you marching for? And so they were asking us, what are you marching for? What are you marching for? What are you marching for? And that, like, well, this is so useless to be marching. You should be doing something else. And I think that we really need to take a moment and say that march was fucking amazing. The fact that women across this globe were marching together for equal rights. I mean, seriously, when is the last time that women from across the globe, in every country almost, I mean, there were, I'm not sure
Antarctica is where I got a little bit misty. I'm like, okay.
Even in Russia, the fact that they showed, small groups of women here and there getting together in that Facebook group. So, that really meant a lot to me that I got to march with my daughter. I grew up, as you guys know, very low income, single mother, let's just say poor, and I wasn't raised to be an activist. My mother in her own ways made me to be quote unquote feminist, but she just wanted to know that I was independent, a woman, and did not have to be codependent on anybody else in my life. Thank goodness. There's good and bad of that, as I've mentioned. But, when so this was my first march. I actually didn't realize that. This is the first time I've ever marched in my life. Very new. As some of you know, I did have arrangements for DC and then was worried about the safety of my daughter. And so canceled that, but did march here. I mean, for me, I was, as some of you have brought up, I was marching for my daughter. I want her to be seen as an equal human being. I don't want her to have to go through her life seen as less than a human being because of the fact that she's female or because of the fact that she's multiracial. And so I think a lot of people felt like we were marching because our candidate didn't win, or we were marching for quote unquote feminism, which feminism, as we all know, has many definitions. For me, I didn't know a lot about feminism until my undergraduate education. So thank you to that required women's studies program and that African reality class that I had to take in undergrad. And so when we talk about changing our curriculum in higher ed, this is another issue because I wouldn't know about a lot of these things if it wasn't for that. For me, feminism is women being equal. And so, for me, it was marching for equality for my daughter. And so it was less about marching for feminism per se, however you want to situate that, or marching for the fact that my candidate may have not won. But it's just knowing that the policies of the new administration are going to put us women at a disadvantage once again. And so that was one thing.
Jump in here for a second, Tanya?
Yeah.
I'm not normally like a Facebook person. I think any of you who know me, you don't see a lot on Facebook except maybe, family pictures or something. But I do stay in connection with a lot of my former students. And I've been teaching since 1986. So many of my students are grown-ups, like older than some of you. And I do like to absorb, and I was kind of going through the feed, and I've been a little bit more fixated on Facebook since last weekend, mostly because I had started with this commitment of like, it's time for me to listen. Like I need to spend some time not being mad at the outcome of this vote. And as you said, Tanya, like my candidate didn't win, and I need to listen. Like clearly there is a populace in this country that hasn't had a voice and feels right now really, really heard for the first time in a long time. And it may come off as venom and vitriol, and I need to kind of weed through that and figure out what's happened in this country that we left such a large population of people behind, that this particular candidate's promises and rhetoric are really strongly resonating. And I know there's a lot about the popular vote, and I'm sorry, like, I know 3 million sounds like a huge number, but I don't know, it's not really that big when it comes to voting. It's nice, it's like a feather in our cap that like there was a popular vote that didn't match the electoral vote, but nonetheless, 3 million votes is not a giant precipice between what's going on right now in the American politics. It's very powerful that there are certain things right now that are happening. So
I want to take that just one step further, and that we are talking about equality, and equality is important. The scariest thing to me is the F in nationalism, and that's, you know, it for the people who are saying we need to get back to our constitutional roots. We are going in exactly the opposite direction. This is everything the Constitution does not stand for. It's nationalism. I have several friends who are, on the block to be deported. Laura is Canadian. So these are the things that are really scary to me. And so when I'm looking at action and I'm saying my 4 years of service is opening spaces, that means borders too. I am done giving any fucks. There are no fucks left. I have none.
Well, let me counter with this counterfuck. When there is scarcity, there tends to be a gathering of like. And I think all of you know enough about just, social anthropology, or, in times of scarcity, people gather together by like whatever. And in our country, that tends to be racially or economically. And somehow this vote has come across as the most powerful scarcity vote that I think has ever happened. And the outcome of that is how the scarcity was displayed in such a way, so powerfully, that people had a hard time figuring out what they were going to go for, which part of the scarcity and the fear they were going to vote with. And we've arrived today because scarcity is real and it's true. And I don't think that anything that's gone, I think that actually having had a Black president and the power of the Black Lives Movement has given a certain amount of credibility to the scarcity politics that had a backlash that brought us to this day. Go ahead, jump in.
Yeah, if you call it scarcity politics, everyone can jump in here too. But, if you look at the rhetorical literature out there, the number one persuasive device is fear. And that's what you're talking about. The scarcity politics, the fear. That is the number one way. And we have seen this over and over and over again in our elections and in our politics, and predominantly actually one party will take on this fear of terrorism, this fear that we're going to be bombed, this fear that we need to make America great again because we're losing it. Nice book, Laura. Go ahead and speak up about that. It's just more or less, and that's why the minute I start getting scared about something because of rhetoric or messages that are being sent to me, I think that's why that I stop and take a look at what the facts are. I think that this week, and the last several weeks have been really hard because I am a scientist. Facts and truth is how I try to make my decisions. And when facts are being made up, and there's so many lies, and I'm told as a scientist that I might not, I'm irreverent, in this country, that becomes really alarming. But, lots of us go on that emotion. Fear gets us going, and they get us voting in a certain way. That's scarcity that you're talking about, Laura, and we need, Nori. But anyways, Laura, you want to talk about your book?
I think that scarcity comes, I don't even think that scarcity is actually that informed. I understand what you're saying, Tanya. I have lived with those fears are things that have been real for me for decades. I'm talking about a scarcity that divides people at the most marginalized levels, that you actually take lower middle class people and give them the feeling of scarcity that is like the most underrepresented people in this country, and then you pit them against one another. I think fear is something that is common and useful in politics, and it keeps people like you and myself on our toes about being informed. When I'm talking about scarcity, I'm talking about something that goes beyond fear. I'm going about something that truly gets down and takes people and makes them divide into, you look like me, and therefore you're the only person on my team.
I'm not sure if I understand, but we'll have to talk about it more sometime.
Yeah, I want to know what Laura has to say.
Can I jump in really quickly and say, in my education experience, I had a lot of students who went to jail. And in my classroom, I was able to talk about racism and everybody getting along, and, you know, black, white, and brown. Everything went beautifully in my classroom. But when I went to visit in jail, and my boys were getting, predominantly boys went to jail at that, you know, whatever. And they're getting tatted out, and they're like, white pride, Peckerwoods. I'm like, are you freaking kidding me? Dude, you are friends with people of multicolors, and you're now a fucking Peckerwood because you're in jail? What the hell is going on with you? And I get schooled because in the moments of scarcity, when you are in jail and you're an 18-year-old man, you hunker down because you only have one choice. You pick what you look like and you join it.
Yeah, and I can't see the difference between that and fear. I mean, it's a safety concern, which is why you join gangs and prisons.
I'm with Tanya. I think it's fear. And I was actually looking at the year of this book. So Shock Doctrine, if you don't know Naomi Klein, you should. She's an award-winning film and journalist, writer. She wrote the book No Logo as well. So she explored the global free market and how our enterprise systems don't work. This Shock Doctrine talks a lot about the impact the free world market trade the U.S. has imposed on other countries based on a crisis. So they've created, maybe it's been a disaster, or there's been a killing spree from a dictator, to there's been a monopoly or something on the global market, where these economists from the U.S. have swooped in and said, we're going to fix your system and create this new socioeconomic system based on what we think is right for you. And the whole basis of the Shock Doctrine is, we are going to create instability, create a sense of fear, create a sense of culture where people buy in and they just push things forward. And we've seen in the first 3 days of presidency, that is already happening. I think it's less about scarcity, it's more about rhetoric, and it's always been fear. But that's been the status quo, and we can blame the media for doing some of this. We can blame the same inner talks between people buying into it. We can blame fake news. We can blame reality, though. This is what our politicians have led. So it's not supposed to be campaigning president is not typically the same president is, except he is following through with some things, not everything. I would say it's out of fear, though. I think it's a point where people are like, this is what we have to do, and everyone has to get behind it. And I think the marches were great to bring about an awareness and have people together and have a sense of community. And we have to keep pushing forward because it's not done yet.
Laura, do you have a sense for how social media and social media filters may have contributed? Is that anything that you've looked at in your work? I've been curious about that myself. I am no longer on Facebook. I just can't with the filtering, and I don't feel responsible when I'm on there. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, if you read like Eli Persier's work, so he does around the filter bubbles. So how do you go beyond that bubble? I could share some of that, but like I think you're right. Like, you've chosen to disengage in Facebook. Well, that's probably fine because the algorithms are only pointing you to certain people, certain things. And if you like it, they show up more. I don't know. I think we live online a lot, all of us, in different ways. But I think it's also important to be offline doing things as well.
But I think there's lots of important lessons. Then there's all the research out that we need to be educating our students on how to be able to identify credible sources. I mean, this information and digital literacy we have been talking about as education pioneers with technology for a very long time. I mean, all of us on this panel have had this conversation, lots of you out there. So how do we increase that digital and technological literacy? I think also we just see this, though, in the common US citizen. How do we do this? And so when we talk about next steps for action, I mean, one, how does this impact, one, the fact that we need to maintain certain general education curriculum to ensure perspective taking in our country. I think also we need to start thinking about these digital and information literacies that we need to be implementing into our curriculum in higher education. And I think also for me, I've been thinking about how, you know, I don't like conflict. I don't like, you know, those sorts of things. I don't mind having arguments based on data and evidence that we can share, and trying to come up with understandings. I know with lots of you on this panel, I've had arguments and I'm trying to understand what you're saying, and we sometimes agree and sometimes disagree. But I've been thinking about more, how can I help educate younger women to become more aware of how these policies impact them? I'm in my 40s and I'm still trying to figure out a lot of this stuff. I'm not a political expert, but I'm, you know, today I found myself, you know, reading the Affordable Care Act to just really figure out every piece of it and how that's going to affect people. I'm not affected by directly. Some of these things I am. And so anyways, just, I want to have more discussions with all sorts of, and I say younger women, but just women in general, about how these sorts of political issues affect us. And also for, you know, I love empowering and being empowered, you know, especially for people with my background, first generation, low education, no education, poor, having more conversations with those women and letting them know there actually are things you can do and you can have a voice. And someday, you know, it's hard to look at my daughter's face and try to have those conversations with her and let her know that she's not going to be seen as equal by some people because one, she's a woman, and two, she's multiracial. I mean, that's disheartening. Come on.
At one point during the Why I March, I'm sorry, Patrice, mine was, I have a niece and a little sister, and I marched, you know, the reasons I mentioned. I need them to feel more empowered than people are going to make them feel. Patrice?
I was going to just jump on what Tanya said, because that was what I was thinking about, was, you know, kind of bringing the conversation to, we're all educators and in the education field. And, you know, sometimes you have to hit rock bottom before you can go back up. And so I think that's one of the things that has come up of this, you know, like Tanya said, I mean, for a long, long time, we have been, you know, talking about the importance of critical thinking and, you know, different types of pedagogies that, you know, maybe now this will, it's kind of like we were teaching online forever and then MOOCs came along and it was as if nobody had ever heard of online. But it was not necessarily a bad thing because now people were like talking about it and thinking about it. And so if we can use this as a you know, just, you know, the second half of our title was, you know, moving forward, you know, so if we can think about, you know, moving forward and, you know, how can we take this and ride with it? And the fact that people are listening now and incorporate that, you know, whether we're an instructional designer, a faculty member, whatever the case, let's take advantage of this. You know, people are listening and they're realizing that, oh, wait, you know, maybe it is important to know what your source is. And maybe everything that we hear is not, you know, a fact when it's on Facebook. And so let's take advantage of that and think about how we can continue those conversations, work with faculty to incorporate some of these things into the curriculum. And I think, you know, and try and connect with people and build some bridges and, you know, help people work together and thinking about how we can continue this conversation and bring it into education, not just in higher ed, but I think it's really important in K through 12. And that's where, you know, in talking to a lot of teachers, you know, for many of them, the day is so structured that they cannot deviate from the plan. And so trying to think about, you know, how can we help them incorporate some of these things into the curriculum so that, you know, the students are getting it throughout their life and not, you know, not just in higher ed.
Can I bring up two questions for you guys that I'm interested in? So I grew up very much, I guess that feminism was sort of this bad word. Do you know what I'm saying? When I grew up and thinking about feminism, I mean, I was thinking of reading Andrea Dworkin, who is like, you know, you can't even talk to men or have relations with them, or because you're not seen as equal. And and thank God again for that gender studies class that let me know that there's different degrees of feminism, but it's not a word that I commonly grew up with. And I think today that it still has this negative connotation. And so, when I have quote unquote arguments, it's fun to banter with people.
I will tell you that's generational.
So I just wanted to know, what was feminism for all of you? Was it in your vocabulary? Was it embraced? That's just one of the questions. I have another one.
Can I jump in as the elder stateswoman?
I say no.
Yeah, no.
Age doesn't matter.
I'm jumping in as the elder stateswoman. No rhetoric there. I'm just hopping in. I was born in 1963. The feminist movement was really powerful in the 70s, and all my babysitters. So when I talk about people who are not old enough to be boring like my parents, but old enough to be my bosses and my mentors, they fall in the babysitter realm. And those were the people that were heavily impacted by feminism, which I would have to say, fucking rough world, my friends. Feminism came with birth control, which meant that men had as much sexual freedom and irresponsibility as women had the ability to try to fit in with the men's power structure. So by the time I was studying feminism in the 80s, and actually I went to a college that had, you had to take a theology class. And I took whatever theology class, and whatever I wrote was, basically, I think the idea of theology is really interesting, but I'm not really a giant theological believer. I think a lot of complicated things. Nonetheless, my professor on my final exam put a big arrow at the bottom and had me turn my exam over and wrote it in a giant letter to me, basically saying, you could not define the word misogynist. And although I didn't bring it up in this course, I put it on this exam for you. And you don't know what the word misogynist means. Two.
Honestly, I think a lot of people don't know what the word misogynist means. And I think, again, it's one of those words that still to this day freaks people out. Like, I'll use it, and I always define it when I use it, because you never know if your audiences understand.
Fair enough. It means basically women hating. It means the hatred of the gender of women and the idea of women. And on this paper, I was given directions that I had one of three choices. I had to take, I was not passing this class, even though I passed the final. He had already set up for me that I could either take libertarian theology, feminist theology, or world theology, a 400 level graduate class. And he'd already made preparations with the professor that that's what I was doing next. Mind you, I was a freshman in college. So I went on and did a study in feminist theology, which had me reading Mary Daly and some of the really hardcore 70s feminist theologians that, like Dworkin, were removing voice from men and only proffering women's voices for anything that had to do with women's bodies.
Could we share some of those? Because I'm not familiar with those authors. So if you can remember any, I'd love to hear about them.
Although my entire bookshelf burned in a fire, I can name them all for you.
So we're going to list some in the doc, because I think we're going to probably run short on time. But I will just say, I do think, and I know that Patrice has read this, that we should all be feminists. A Nigerian, Adichie, is an author. This was her TED Talk, essentially. It's a short little book. I think I agree with her sentiment of inclusion and awareness. And I grew up in an environment in the late 80s, early 90s, going to university at a late 90s group that had a really big feminist movement in all walks of life. Like, we were the first city that made it legal to go topless in Ontario, the province. We were the first city that had sleep-ins that were protesting. So when you guys talked about protest, I've had hand grenades tossed at me and Molotov cocktails. Those are the kind of marches I've been to before. So I heard that this one was quite tame. But I think the reason I like that, this is a Nigerian woman who talks about other people's impression of feminism in a different country and cultural perspective. And I think we all come from it in different lenses, backgrounds, experiences. but it's when there's cultural norms around that and expectations for women, and being from North America, we don't have those. I'll put on us. I'm actually quite grateful that we are part of a more inclusive and aware society.
And I was just going to jump in because my daughter had to write actually a paper about what is feminism when she took a course. And I was going to just share her definition without her permission. But she defined it as, it is important for all women to feel empowered in their own lives and not be held back because a man tells her she is not good enough to succeed. This includes mothers who want to work and raise their children, single women who want successful careers, women who choose to stay home full-time with their children, and every other woman trying to redefine what it means to be a feminist. I think, you know, what I loved about it is that it is inclusive. You know, it includes all of these different things. And I think, you know, like Tanya and Nori said, growing up in a time, I always thought feminism was kind of a bad word, from the standpoint that it meant that you were like, way out in left field, so to speak, and a man hater and, different things. I mean, that was the generation that I grew up in. And so I'm really appreciative of the fact that, now, I mean, that, being a feminist is a good thing. And it means that it's really about self-care and love and being supportive and, being there to bring up the person next to you, being there when they need you. And, being able to share your voice and, be a voice for somebody else when they need that. So it's really...
Let me jump in here for a second and say that in this group, we have pointed to women who are, I will quote, and I won't name anybody, but we have talked about women who have, quote, played with the boys so long that they have no humor. And that is where feminism was from the 70s. It was not about empowering other people. It was not about making people feel good. It was about actually fighting and making sure with no humor at all that I will show up at your table and I will be there and I will have the same voice because the law gives it to me. There's nothing fuzzy or nice about it. I'm not welcome. I'm not included. I'm going to show up against all odds and I'm going to sit there and make you uncomfortable and participate in ways in a business suit.
You're saying this from a male perspective, Nori.
No, I'm not.
You're saying women felt that other women were showing up to make them feel uncomfortable?
I'm saying other women were showing up because there were no other women there.
So I think what you're saying is what we talked about again at the Online Learning Consortium Conference and WCET's conference, the WICHE Cooperative for Educational Technology, in that a lot of women had to take on masculine roles. That was sort of some of this feminism early on, was taking on masculine roles in order to be seen as equal. Is that what you're referring to?
I'm saying those were the only options.
Yeah.
Not that they could take on a masculine role to participate. If you just simply were uncomfortable with the status quo,
right.
You had no other options. There was no empowering other women. You literally joined and played with those rules because the law was on your side.
Right. And I think what Patrice, in talking about what her daughter wrote, is very much sort of, not to say new age feminism, but a little bit more about what we're feeling today, and that you can be
absolutely. Yeah. Yes.
That, I mean, I remember not understanding feminism in undergrad and still trying to figure out. And I was raised, sort of idea this feminism was no getting married, no kids, focus on your career, work like a man, dress like a man, that sort of thing. You guys have heard me talk about my defeminization almost that my mother put me through. And to be able to take on that masculine role. But I remember my instructor, Sally Hensel, I had in communication, she said to me, no, feminism is your right to choose. Your right to choose if you want to work or not. Your right to choose whether you want to have children or not. And I didn't understand women in the 50s not having a choice about marriage, being pushed into it, not having a choice about having kids, because there was no birth control and these sorts of things. lot of times some women don't know historically, especially when we're talking about low income, first generation college students, they don't know this history of women's, progression through the decades. And so I used to think, this is great. I get to choose, right? On my life, I get to choose whether to be married or not, whether to have kids, whether to get educated, whether to have a career. And for me, now it's going a step further when I talk about feminism. So yes, I was able to do these things, but I feel they were super, super hard. And there were structures all over society, even to this day, that are oppressing me. I just was reading a blog post again from Mahalia Bali. Am I saying that right? And she was talking about, being a mother, you instantly give up certain things. To try to travel to a conference with a child, and we've talked about some of this before. Am I guilty because I'm leaving my child? Who's going to take care of my child when I'm gone? Do I bring the child with? How does all of that work? I mean, just for one example. But now what I really loved about what we did last year in 2016 is that we started identifying structures, rules, and resources and systems that continue to quote unquote oppress us, for lack of a better word, but they definitely guide us one way or another towards success or away from success, whatever that is. And so I like that these conversations are letting us reveal some of those and think about how we can make changes. I think this march showing that as women symbolically, we are a mass to be reckoned with. And now, yes, we can take it into action, whatever that is for all of you. I'll get off my wine box now.
We've only got 4 minutes anyway, so.
We have a lot of resources we're probably not going to get to, but I think it's been cool to see all of you share, even Kelly share her bookshelf of what to read. And I'm also thinking about reading other stuff too. I posted a link to have dialogues with different people and people have differences and people I don't usually reach out to just because you get comfortable with the same, right? And so we always flock to the same thing. So I'm thinking about reading biographies of different people who are on the right if I'm on the left, or different views of walks of life. So I think my advice to move forward is to continue to educate ourselves in a round way. And for me, it's reading, and I do listen to a lot more podcasts, and I'm collecting more. Thank you very much for all of you who posted on my Instagram. I thank you. But I think it's thinking about different voices. And for me, it's an audio and print format. That's what I'm going to be working on.
And I'm glad you said that, because I think it is, when we talk about critical thinking and different things, but it's so important to be able to see things through the eyes of someone else, and to have that empathy and to be able to see multiple perspectives. And you don't have to agree, but in order to have meaningful conversations, it's really helpful to have those skills and just be able to see things through somebody else's eyes. And take that moment and just really listen and try and understand where that person's coming from.
Along those lines, I'm going to jump in the bucket of discomfort this year and beyond. And I mean, like Laura, you mentioned going to lunch with other. I will call my family. I unfriended during the election. I've already had some difficult conversations with my father. I will, I am seeking that discomfort, and the march and the friends I went with at the march and our different perspectives, that was really useful. So bring on the year of awkward.
Let's all go around. Jess, thanks. I'm going to use what you did with segue with one action item. And we'll close out today's session with that being our rant. My action items, I bought a bunch of stamps, have a bunch of envelopes. I'm going to be following my folks on Facebook who have regular updates about sending important messages to our represented leaders. Anyone else have an action you want to share today?
I shared on Twitter the 10 days. The friends who went to the march and I are going to start following the 10 days or 10 actions, 100 days that came from the Women's March. And that's just a very small part of what we're going to do, but we're going to do that together as a group. So we're going to go through and follow up on those, as well as my actively seeking other.
Laura, Tanya, go ahead.
I've
Yeah,
said
I'm
mine. Tanya, go.
on the Republican ticket in Wisconsin. No, I'm just kidding. No, I think it's very simple. There is no big strategy or plan. I just want to have more discussions with people who right now don't understand what equality means from my perspective, and also try to understand their perspective, and try to just have more of those discussions and more information, meaningful information sharing on social media for people like Jess had mentioned, my family, and others that I know from growing up that just do not have that information. A lot of this information politically is in like a different foreign language. It's hard to consume that, especially if you don't have a college education. And even with a college education, sometimes it's difficult. So I'm opening myself up to have, conversations with anybody who wants to have them about these different views. Just really quick, I want to say to the jerk on Twitter who tried to allude to the fact that we don't have human trafficking and sex trade of young women in America.
Don't
You
acknowledge him.
are the idiot, because
Don't
it's
acknowledge him.
in America as well.
Don't acknowledge him.
Yeah.
Or her, whoever.
Okay.
And I think for me, just continuing to do what we're doing, I think, one of the things that I love about these podcasts and the conversations we've had at conferences is getting these conversations going. I mean, it's clear that people want to talk, they want to share, they want to have their voices heard. And so I think, continuing the work that we've been doing. And the one book that I read that I shared in the document, it talked a lot about really thinking about your goals as gift goals. What is it that you really care about and are passionate about, as opposed to what is it that you think you should be doing or society thinks you should be doing. And so for me, just thinking about those things and continuing to work on just trying to understand how, we can use some of the new digital tools and things to increase accessibility to education for people who don't have that access, because that's all of what we're talking about is, educating people so that they have the skills to be informed, whatever the decision is that they make, that they have those skills to assess things and think about things, and come to a decision that way. And so that's what I hope to accomplish in 2017.
Awesome. We've run a little bit over on time. And the fact that it's only by 2 minutes means that we have an incredible amount of self-control. Follow us on Twitter. We will be back next month. We will surely have many important things to say about the feminist perspective, the revision of the feminist perspective in light of new things going on in our government. Thank you all for joining us, and we will be back next month. Follow us at #3WEDU. Take care, all.
Bye.